On this episode of the Commute Podcast, I talk with Chirag Joshi in Bangalore, India. Chirag's a YouTuber, and for the last couple of years, he's been talking about mobility. He's part of the Gen Z, pretty young, but he shares a lot of similar passions to me. And, one thing we have in common was just our mutual interest in being part of the mobility revolution. We didn't necessarily know where we could best apply our skills and what opportunity was the best. And so we've each approached mobility as a little bit of an experiment and research endeavor to try to find the place in the world for us to be able to make an impact. I really admired the way that Chirag is looking at his experience in working with a bunch of mobility startups. He's done his own in India, and I think he's going to continue to be a really big mobility influencer. What I really like about the content he puts out is that it's thought-provoking and it's helping young people consider mobility as an alternative to vehicle ownership. So we have a really interesting conversation. It was really late at night for me, really early in the morning for him. But I think Chirag represents a group of people around the world that are just trying to find a way to be a part of something that's going to transform the way we live, and that's the mobility industry. So check out this episode. On tonight's episode of the Commute Podcast, we're going to have a conversation with somebody that's on the other side of the world where I'm really interested in the perspective of someone in this age group, because I think it's really important that we influence Gen Z to make different decisions about how they commute. And if we can influence this age group, I think that's going to be able to set us off for decades of progress in mobility that will ultimately end up in a world where we have autonomous vehicles. And so I'm joined by Chirag Joshi. He is in Bangalore, India. He has done a lot of interesting things in a short period of time around mobility. And I think when we first met, found a lot of similarities in how we found our way into mobility, which was just kind of like an interest in trying to be part of what is a huge movement of innovation around changing the way people travel. So, Chirag, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. And, really excited to see how we go ahead with this conversation.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your background, what you've been doing recently.
Yeah. So I am from Bangalore, India. And this is one of the best things that could have happened to me because, Bangalore is one of those cities in India that's just kind of like the Silicon Valley version of India, where we have all of this amazing innovation always happening around you. And that was true since I was in high school, right? And I got really attracted to this world because, I saw this a world of creators creating whatever they want to and influencing the world around them. And that was really powerful for me. That was something I wanted to do as well. And fortunately enough, the way in which this innovation was also happening was, in building really cool, unique businesses. And that was something I was intrigued by as well. So I did my graduation in business. And ever since the first year of college, I got really attracted to this world of mobility, electric vehicles, this new way of moving ahead that I had never experienced before. Because again, I'm just 22, but if you take my father's age or even his father's age, for all of time, at least for the last 100 years since motor vehicles have been introduced in human lives, there hasn't been a lot of change in the way that we move, in the sense that cars have been the same, metros have been there, trains have been there, so there hasn't been radical and tectonic shifts in the automotive landscape. But I realized that in 2016, this was I was just 18 years old then, in first year of college. I realized that all of that's going to change. The way we fundamentally move around is just going to change so much. It's not going to be immediate. It's not going to be in 2 to 5 to 10 years. It's going to take time, but it's happening, right? The start has already happened. So that was really powerful for me. And I'm a person who's really driven by impact. And I saw this as a way to have sort of, a good amount of impact on people after me who will, not move in the same way that we do today. So that was really powerful for me. So that's what captivated me towards this industry, towards what it's doing. And I have since then done a bunch of things. The aim always being to usher in, to try and see how we can, usher in mass adoption of clean mobility, whether it's electric vehicles, whether it's some other form of clean energy, whatever it is. Right now, it seems to be batteries are the way to go. Mm-hmm. So that's where my focus has been for the last 4 years. And I've ended up doing a bunch of things, from, trying to run an experiment of renting out these two-wheeler electric vehicles in India to delivery companies, to, launching one of the first really mainstream electric vehicle mediums on social media in India. And just like Ryan doing his podcast, I do have a podcast of my own where I, again, just like he's diving into his interests, I do dive into my own interests and engage my guests with it. That has really accelerated my learning of the industry, because I'm just I was like, I think I was 19 when I started the whole social media thing. So much to learn. I still have a long way to go in terms of learning, but I think doing social media has really accelerated my learning, because I get to meet hundreds and hundreds of people from the industry doing very interesting and unique work. And that's I think that's priceless. I don't know where I would get that knowledge and insight. Yeah. And fast forward to when I graduated last year, had a chance to intern with one of the most, I think one of the biggest EV ecosystem players in this country, backed by one of our billionaires who, again, from the IT world. So that was really amazing. Then just before the pandemic started this year, ended up launching a startup with some really interesting people. And currently, again, I think I'm in that same direction, helping people really build their own businesses in this place and sort of helping them strategize the go-to market. It's a really exciting opportunity. I'd love to tell you more about it, right? But this is like my brief background.
That's great. Well, your podcast is called
The Driven Show.
The Driven Show.
Yeah.
And what is your Instagram?
It's Driven Differently.
Driven Differently. Interesting. Yeah. And being 22, have you had to make the decision of how to commute? I guess you've had a couple of internships. How have you been commuting?
So I have my scooter, which is I don't know how to describe it, but it's a moped kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like a two-wheeler.
Yeah.
And that's, I got it in the first year of my college, and I've been using it ever since. So the only I rely heavily on my scooter. So wherever I have to go, I just use it.
Which is very common in Bangalore.
Very common,
right?
Very convenient, very cost effective. So it's one of the most popular. In fact, India is the biggest market for two-wheelers in the world. We sell 20 million every year.
So tell me a little bit about this. You said you had a two-wheeler sharing business.
Oh yeah. So it was not a business. It's actually an experiment that I tried to do. So it was basically, in 2016, we didn't have a lot of good electric two-wheelers out there in the market. Since then, we've had a lot, but back then we didn't. So my aim was, again, I'm a business guy. I'm a, sort of commerce kind of guy. So I can't really build an electric vehicle. I'm not an engineer. I do have interest, but again, I don't have the skills to build it. So I thought, I can at least help figure out the application of this technology, in use cases that would make sense.
Right.
So one of the first places I saw was food delivery or e-commerce, right?
Yeah.
Because these guys were using their two-wheelers extensively every day, over like 150 kilometers. That costed them anywhere between 200 to 250 rupees on petrol every day. And that was a cost for these delivery people who were sort of from the low income strata of society, and they weren't earning a lot of money. So I thought, maybe introducing electric vehicles in their lives would help reduce their operational costs significantly, which
Yeah.
was true. So I actually went around serving a bunch of delivery people, went around serving a bunch of delivery related companies, e-commerce related companies, and I found out that yeah, this could work. So then I uh, tried to, once I logged on that there is an opportunity, then I started looking out for worthy electric vehicles in the field. Honestly, there weren't many.
Mm-hmm.
There just weren't many good ones out there. It was a real bad condition. But then I somehow ended up finding this one company right here in Bangalore who was building what I believe one of the best scooters on the road back then. Since then, we've had a lot of good ones, but back then that was the only one I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of test drove it, and I wanted to buy it, but unfortunately, the company wasn't selling that particular scooter because it has just been introduced by the company. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
available for B2C customers like me.
Right.
It
Right.
was
Right.
more for B2B, 100 units at a time, 500
Yeah.
units
Yeah.
at a time. That was the business model. But I somehow pestered the founder and got him to sell it to me. And this was without any kind of formal registration with the road authorities here, any kind of institutional finance, and any kind of institutional insurance. There was nothing, you know.
It because
Uh,
it didn't exist yet, right?
it didn't exist. There was no infrastructure. There was no ecosystem for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Nothing to
these are the
regulate.
challenges. Exactly. There was just, I mean, it was just so, I would say, insignificant that the authorities or this ecosystem did not care enough to build something around it. They still don't, but it's still much better than what it was in just 4 years back. So,
Yeah. Well, that's kind of I guess maybe the sign of success, right? When you're big enough to regulate and
exactly.
have a concern. So
Exactly.
you found that you were just maybe a little too early on that business model.
I found so this whole yeah. So I bought the scooter. It took me some time. Bought the
Yeah.
scooter, and then I gave it out to a couple of food delivery companies to test it out. Now the problem was on two fronts. Number one was security because it had no registration, no insurance. There was a high probability of theft. And the community that ends up performing these tasks or delivery were usually a community with high attrition rates. They don't
Yeah.
stick around for too long.
Right.
So the
Right.
risk was always for them to take the scooter or sort of take out some parts of the scooter, say the battery, and just go and sell it off somewhere else. So I would never. So I lose money
Right.
on that,
Right.
and that's a potential risk. The second problem was range. It didn't have too much range on it. It was decent, 50 to 60, but not for the use case of delivery where they travel 150 kilometers every day. They need a higher range, and those were problems I couldn't solve on my own. I couldn't do anything
Yeah.
about it. So that was primarily the reason why I couldn't go ahead with that kind of thing.
I I've tried to use electric vehicles in our business, and it's I found the same thing, that it just doesn't have uh, the right vehicle and is not in the right market. The vehicles that are in the market don't have the right range, and I don't see that changing even. Ford's coming out with a new Transit that's electric in the United States, and we're using it for passenger vans. But the range is still not something that you're going to be able to get an 8-hour shift out of, and you're not going to be able to
Yeah.
do long range. And I think it's getting better, and it's probably about finding the limited use cases where you could do it at scale.
Yeah.
But there's so many parts of the supply chain that are interdependent as you're trying to build these new mobility solutions. And so you started attacking it on the two-wheeler, and you did it kind of as this experiment to learn, which I think is fascinating. My equivalent to that is I did car sharing with an electric vehicle. And so I had a Tesla Model S that for 2 years I shared with others on a site called Turo,
I've
Turo.com.
heard. I've heard.
Yep. And about 7 days a month, somebody else would have my car. But that was enough to fully cover the cost of the vehicle, the insurance, a a little bit of cleaning and maintenance,
Mm-hmm.
and enough to be able to drive it the rest of the month and be able to afford a car that was very much outside of my means at the time.
Yeah.
And it set me off on this pursuit of how car sharing and shared mobility could be done in different ways. And like,
Mm-hmm.
there's been a bunch of business models that have been tried, some bigger than others because of funding,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Had somebody given you a SoftBank $50 million investment, you could have done that at scale and still kind of gotten to the same conclusion that this business model isn't all there yet.
Yeah.
We're missing the technology, the range isn't there,
Yeah.
we can't get the suppliers, or
Yeah.
whatever it is, right? There's a number of
Mm-hmm.
things you'll find out no matter how much
Mm-hmm.
money you have.
Mm-hmm.
So you're also building this very unique data set of
Mm-hmm.
experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what's your ambition with that personal data set?
I think for me, I think I've always since the longest time I've always had this little identity crisis in terms of where do I belong, because
Uh-huh.
I mean there are multiple examples of it. So I am, from my entire community and family, I'm the first generation to be brought up in a mega city like Bangalore in India. Most of my
Okay.
cousins and immediate cousins have grown up in sort of tier 2 cities, so they are very different, and I can see that gap because this is close family, this is one cousin away, sort of two cousins away.
Yep.
So when I speak to them and when I interact with them, I see the radical difference in my upbringing and in theirs, in terms of the exposure we've had, right? But I'm not completely a city boy, or I'm not completely a country boy, right?
Yeah.
So I've always had that thing in a lot of ways, even in terms of my economic status, even in terms of which city I live in, all of that. So I've always had this sort of, I don't know how to say. I think it's a dichotomy. I don't know, but there's
Yeah.
always this friction between, am I this or am I that? There's no clear. I've never boxed myself.
Yeah.
I've never found a box to fit myself in. So I've never seeked one, right? So and that sort of led me to try and find a space where I really feel like I belong, like
Yeah.
truly 100%, not like a part of it, like 100%, right? And that happens to be this field of mobility, this field of clean mobility, shared mobility, connected mobility. And I feel this industry is something, is the closest, is the most consistent I've been with, because there are a lot of things I've tried, nothing stuck with me, but mobility is something that I've consciously stuck with for the past 4 years. So it seems like there is something that's really truly something that that belongs to me here, and that I need to be here and contribute here, and that's happened. So for the ambition for me is, I've actually very publicly committed my life towards this industry, and for me the ambition, my personal ambition, is to get clean and just sustainable mobility to a place where it becomes important for any individual's personal progress in life, just like how mobility has become that important. Like, if you're denied the access of moving around, just like anyone who's handicapped, he can't travel. His travel movements are very restricted, and so are his opportunities,
Yeah.
unfortunately, right? Now imagine the power of mobility. That's when you understand the power of mobility, and how much we're dependent on it for our own personal progress. So that's very powerful for me, and I want to do that. So in a sentence, if you have to put it, I want to make clean mobility or sustainable mobility essential for human progress. We have to get it to that stage. So that's important, I believe.
Yeah. No, it's admirable. And you found your way. I mean, as you've been exploring this, I think one of the things that you're consistently finding is that people don't understand it. Is that is that
Mhm.
right? And so
So,
you.
I mean, everyone has their own versions of it.
Mhm.
So, they're on one side of the equation where, most people are just on the supply side of things where, they're building these electric vehicles. They're, they're good at their craft of, building
Yeah.
great electric vehicle and all of that. That's great. But I think, there needs to be this mindset of going out there, understanding what is it that consumers. I'm a consumer side guy. Okay. So I need
Okay.
to really dive deep into that world. So that I feel is lacking a bit, where people are not taking into account the ultimate consumer who's going to end up using these vehicles, is what I think.
Yeah. So with your YouTube channel, are you focused? So you're focused more on educating the consumer around electric vehicles?
Yes. So with the YouTube channel and with any of the social media that I do, the aim is to engage them in this conversation, because not too long ago they didn't even care about it. So the only thing I want to do is make them care about it a little, at least,
Yeah.
so that they start having these conversations, start thinking about it.
And what are you finding? I mean, do
I
they
think
care?
what I found, at least in my network, is that people have started to look at it seriously, because someone around them who looks just like them cares so much about them. So either by annoyance or by intrigue, they're like, what the hell is there in this space, and why does this guy care so much about it?
Oh yeah,
right?
just like a Tesla owner. They're a total pain in the ass about
exactly.
how great the car is. It's true. I mean,
Exactly.
it's true.
Yeah, it is, right? So that's led to some very good conversations, some good level of so what's happened is, over the course of last year, I think I've been doing this for 4 years, and everyone knows that around me. Okay, so I'm like their EV guy. If they want anything related to do with EV, they just come to me, text me, call me, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And this is if they wanna. So it's at a stage right now that if they come across anything across EV, they're gonna DM it to me on Instagram or send it to me on WhatsApp or whatever, They just know that I'm that guy, so they'll just funnel it back to me. So all of these big people have become like funnels of like EV related stuff happening in the world to me. And that means, and if they're sending it to me, which means that it catches their eye as well when they're scrolling through their phones or whatever, so it's somewhere sitting in their mind. And I put out a lot of content, I believe, in the last 3-4 years. So I think it's working. And a lot of people have ended up calling me to ask for suggestions in terms of what electric vehicle should they buy, or what kind of dealership they should take up. They're planning to take up an electric vehicle dealership in India, so which brand should they go to, or which brand should they go for? So a lot of interesting stuff has happened of people around me, and I'd like to believe that I had some role to play in that decision of theirs.
So consumer adoption of electric vehicles, I think, is definitely starting to pick up steam. But there are a lot of forces against electric vehicles, right? You have the entire oil industry that's kind of very dependent on the supply chain around gasoline. You also have the entire supply chain. Well, let me ask you this. What is the sales network like for automobiles in India?
It's the dealership model, just like in the US.
Yes.
Right? Where you have these individual dealerships who are not connected with one company, but they're kind of like a third-party franchisee of it. And they own these dealerships from where they sell, and they get a cut out of it, pretty standard stuff.
Nothing. So you'd have like Joshi Tata.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's going to be like, it's going to be, if I have a dealership of a Tata vehicle, so it'll be like, Tata commercial vehicles. And then my name will be smaller in the right-hand corner saying Joshi Motors, or whatever, something like that. So that's usually the thing. And people make a lot of money out of it, honestly.
Yeah, it's a good business, right? And my understanding of it is a large percentage of it is based on service revenue, right?
Yes. The bulk of revenue comes on the after sales revenue. They don't make too much on the sale. They don't.
So the electric vehicle inherently has less maintenance and less recurring maintenance costs to the owner.
Yes.
So what have you learned, or what have you seen from dealerships in your area?
This is actually a problem I delved into quite deeply for like 5-6 months last year. And I was planning to launch a solution for it, but unfortunately the pandemic struck, some other stuff happened, so we didn't end up doing that. But anyway, what I found was that the dealership model, the current automotive dealership model is unsuitable for electric vehicles for precisely the reason that you said, which is there just isn't enough revenue for these middlemen to earn. So they won't push electric vehicles through their networks, right? Yep. So it's an unsustainable business model, unsustainable sales and distribution channel, which you can't pursue. So the only other way is online and digital, right? Where you have this digital presence out there and people can buy off stuff. That's good. That's not just good for the dealership or the sales network. That's also good for the consumer, where they're just used to buying stuff online. Why would they want to go to physical store and all that? I think we are yet to witness a big sales and distribution revolution in the automotive space yet, but I think it's coming. A lot of people are working on it, and I think it's coming. So yeah, I think automotive dealership is just an unsustainable business. We won't see a lot of them in the EV and shared mobility world.
Yeah, I mean, I've had personal experiences around challenges of buying electric vehicles through traditional dealerships. I've also seen some dealers go above and beyond to try to understand EVs and that consumer, really taking the long view and saying, like, we're going to figure out how to build value for the customer in different ways, even if we lose out on some short-term revenue. There's I think there's just inevitability that it's going to happen, right?
Exactly.
The other thing that I think is very much against electric vehicles, that's like a hidden limiting factor, is the ability of electrical grids to be able to handle a significant increase if a large percentage of the gas vehicles were replaced with electric vehicles, right? Have you spent much time looking at kind of the electrical grid readiness?
Yeah. So that's a problem a lot of people speak about, which is, what's going to happen if, one day we wake up and we're going to have like 40% of all vehicles on road as electric. And, that's going to put a lot of pressure on the grid. That's going to, in fact, increase our electricity consumption and reliance on coal, because India, again, we have a big percentage of coal and non-renewables powering our electricity. So the answer to that question is, that's a very, I'd say, unnatural hypothesis out there, where, we're just going to wake up one day, we're going to have 40% of all vehicles electric. That's never going to happen. It's going to be a gradual increase, right? And that's and while there's a gradual increase in clean vehicles, the grid, in fact, is getting cleaner along the way. So there's going to come this inflection point where, the grid readiness, the way the electricity is generated is going to parallelly moving alongside electric vehicle consumption. And in fact, I believe, because there exists a potential future of heavy electricity consumption, the grid people on the grid side and the whole infrastructure side are kind of in urgency mode, or in I'd say sort of not slacking their asses off, but in a certain forward thinking mode, where they're trying to get this grid ready, because they don't want that situation either, right? So if at all anything, the push for electric vehicles is also helping push the grid readiness and the grid becoming cleaner. And I don't think at least in India, we won't encounter a situation where we're just not able to handle this stuff. I don't think it's possible.
Yeah. I'm glad I mentioned that, because I think that's probably a false assumption I had about grid preparedness. You did a good job of articulating how it's going to be this kind of gradual progression. I've spent far more time thinking about the sharing side of this connected, autonomous, shared electric future, right? And you've clearly spent a lot of time thinking about the electric. How do you see those two things working together, or even adding in the autonomous aspect? What type of business models do you see working with sharing based on what you've experienced?
So in India, in the last 5 years, we've had a lot of sharing, mobility sharing companies pop up, like a lot. Okay. And that's worked very well for us, because our public transportation infrastructure isn't really there. It really sucks. So, people unfortunately had to rely, the only way to move around was your own personal vehicle. But there seems to be, now that, the whole economy is getting a little modern, a little fast paced, where we're moving around cities more often than we used to 10 to 20 years back. So there's this urbanization coming into the ecosystem where, there's this need for shared services.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, people like Ola and Uber have entered and really changed the game, honestly. Like, Indians would have never imagined that they could travel anywhere they want without owning a car ever. That was just not on our heads, but that happened.
Yeah.
And once that sort of mental barrier has been broken, a lot of people have tried to capitalize on it, and a lot of them are electric. In fact, so in India, unlike in the US, where the approach to electric and shared is kind of like these very luxury, very, I would say, aspirational uh, products and services, just like Tesla and its autonomous driving and its shared services, right? In India and in countries like India, the approach, unfortunately, is not top down; it's bottom up, right?
Okay.
So our way of experimenting and our first grounds of innovation are these smaller sort of bottom of the pyramid places. For example, it's micro mobility. Say you have in I mean, majority of the transportation happens in sort of first mile, last mile. The first 3 kilometers, the last 3 kilometers.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know. In India, we don't have a lot of solutions for it. So there's a company called Yulu, YULU, which has come out with these really tiny Indianized versions of a bird scooter that go for that have a top speed of 25 kmph. And people use them. They have a smartphone app. You scan it, you unlock the thing from various docks they have around the city, and you use it. So it's you pick it up from one dock, slam it down on another dock. That's so you complete your commute there. So that's an
Mm-hmm.
electric shared business that's happening. The other place where it's happening is also in the logistics space, where a lot of companies are again, exactly with what I started, now becoming a little more practical, which is two-wheelers in the delivery and logistics space, where a lot of these delivery folks opt onto these electric, I wouldn't say scooters like how I had one, but
Mm-hmm.
smaller Yulu kind of versions of these, and
Mm-hmm.
they go and deliver their food and sort of make their living. So that's happening as well. Now, in terms of how I see these different, I won't say different, but very parallel innovations colliding, I think it's very obvious. We have the answer. It's just happened. I'd say, I think a week or two back, with Zoox announcing their uh, autonomous ride-sharing business and product. Like, that's the ultimate culmination, right? It's autonomous, it's shared, and it's electric, right? That's the culmination of all of those three fields that's come to him.
Yeah. So that was very much funded by the Amazon acquisition,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And it's an aspirational
Hmm.
future. It's not something that's necessarily available, but it's a subscription model I very much believe in, right? The
Mm-hmm.
idea that you don't have to own um, a vehicle like that. It's going to show up as you need it.
Mm-hmm.
Amazon's got the ability to do it at scale. That should be very scary to any of the automakers that
Absolutely.
have not really taken, because it's so foreign to their business model to do what
Yes,
Zoox is saying they could do, right?
exactly.
The idea that you could put out look at the sheer number of vehicles that sit at a dealership lot at any given
Mm.
time, right?
Yeah.
Those vehicles have an inventory cycle of anywhere from like 15 to 45 days typically, right? Those
Yeah.
vehicles could be out being used. um, I also think it does something very interesting to the innovation cycle that Zoox is
Mm-hmm.
going to be able to do with a
Yeah.
subscription model like this. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, I got into building software like 10 years ago. And when I
Mm-hmm.
started building software, it was like the early days of cloud software, and
Mm-hmm.
SaaS software it had been around for a few years, but it was still fairly
Yeah.
new.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the old way of building software was that you'd pay for a big setup fee, and you'd have
Yeah.
your own instance, and every year you'd pay a software maintenance. And then when new
Mhm.
features would come out, you'd pay for those feature upgrades.
Yeah.
And then the new model was you create an account and you have an account
Yeah.
and new features get pushed all the time and you get all the new features and you just pay a monthly subscription. And as your use goes up, your costs go up, right? And then
Mhm. Mhm.
that's what's happening in the automotive industry.
Mhm. It's
But
become
it's
a little more
still
service
early.
based than asset based, because the asset based model hasn't really worked out for anyone. Like if you
It's
imagine,
worked out for the automakers.
yeah, apart from that, apart from oil and gas and automakers, no one else
Yeah,
has benefited from it.
like
So,
the
it's
consumer.
predominantly, yeah, like the consumer. Who else? The consumer, the environment, the cities. It hasn't benefited anyone, in fact,
But people love
who are
cars.
the
I
ultimate
think
consumer.
that's the thing you can't forget.
They do.
People love
Yeah, they do,
cars.
but they also hate traffic. They also hate those debts that they have to take up to buy these cars. They also hate that they have to shell out so much cash just to be able to afford it. And in some ways, it's also coming into these getting into this motivation or philosophical land a little bit, where it's the ultimate pinnacle of sort of hiding your insecurities, just buying stuff. And one of the biggest and most lavish purchases you can make is a car. you know I mean, a house I won't call lavish and unpractical, because it's an asset and it's property, and you earn out of it after a couple of years. But a car is a depreciating asset, man. Like you
And
pay for that and you're not getting that money back.
and this statement that you just made about your viewpoint of cars as a not a good purchase, do you feel like that is a commonly held view of your peers?
It's increasingly becoming one. You
Yeah.
can see it with the millennial generation. I mean, my dad's generation would have that aspiration of, like,
Yeah.
they're literally, the self-worth is placed on, oh, will I be able to buy a car? Oh, what kind of car will I be able to buy? Like their self-worth was really a big part of the self-worth was on that, and social status dependent on that. I think it's starting to break away. Like me, I've never owned a car and I know to drive one, simply because I had a shared rental service right in my backyard. I mean, in Bangalore
Mhm.
city, and I learned driving on those cars. I rented them out by the
Yep.
hour, and I learned. So so people don't really crave owning a car. Most people, I would say, a good chunk of them really crave owning a car because of the other things that it buys in terms of social status and looking cool and all of that stuff.
Mhm.
But most people, there's I'd say a big chunk of people who just enjoy driving. Now, if you just enjoy driving, why would you want to pay 10 lakhs, 20 lakhs just to be able to afford that experience? At the end of the day, you crave the experience of driving a car.
Yeah.
That can be commoditized. That can be given at much cheaper rates than being able to buy one. So that's what people are realizing. And someone like me, I love driving. But I would never in my dreams pay 20 lakhs just to drive a car. I would never do that.
Well, you might if it was the right car or the right experience,
Again,
right?
I don't know. At least in the world we're heading into, I don't see myself, really. I might buy one. I don't know. I don't know. I would love to own a Tesla. Like that's the that's the ultimate thing. But that's because I just love. It's an area of love. So much, which is, it's electric. It represents the future. It's someone who I identify with per se. That's all there. But for most people, I think the game can be changed, and more people are increasingly realizing that. In fact, the founder of Ola, who's a billionaire now, one of the most famous things he's done is he does not have a car. He drives around in Ola cabs. Like that was his sort of personality. That I'm the founder of this company, and one of the things I'm doing this for is for people to not end up buying cars and using Ola cabs instead.
Yep.
So he did that,
Yeah.
and that's a big statement.
Well, absolutely. He's a participant in the movement, and he's not just
Exactly.
skipping out on it as soon as he can afford something really nice.
Exactly.
He could have anything he wants. I think it's important that we influence your generation to continue to not seek the social status of owning a vehicle
Exactly.
while being able to make sure that they understand how to drive one. I think it's an important skill. I think like that's an important human skill we have of being able to drive a car. I think it's important for one's personal freedom to be able to have the ability to get in one. But you're right, it doesn't require ownership. And I'm very much like you. Like I love cars. I really enjoy. At times, I enjoy driving, and I think that I would love nothing more than getting to go to a track and like drive a car for sport. People loved horses too,
That's true. But I think that being said, I think my generation, it won't be the last generation too. I think my generation, in the next 20 years, I think this whole car ownership thing won't go away. I mean, see, all things being said and done, we're still going against 100-year-old gigantic industries. That's not going to happen. Like the behavior shift, the economic shift, the infrastructure shift, all of that stuff is going to take a lot of time and a lot of money and energy to be put behind to start gaining just mass sort of momentum behind a new world. And I think a 20-year timeline is good for this whole shift to happen. 20 years later, say today, 2040, the babies born in 2040, you can say, these people will never do or never see or experience mobility in the way that we do. They won't. That's good. But the babies born today, I still think they will. I still think they'll go around and they'll see their mommies and daddies owning cars, and they'll still see, all of the stuff that we currently have. But I think babies born in 2040, that's a worldview where we can say, once those guys grow up, that's going to be a completely new world. So we have 20 years for that. Long time.
I've learned that it's really risky to put a date on how quickly any of this innovation is going to happen. But I don't disagree with your 20-year horizon. What I think is the really determining factor on this is who ends up innovating in these new business models. So if Amazon and Zoox get the resources to be able to go to market, they have the potential power to not have those legacy systems or infrastructures or investments that they have to depreciate. If a traditional automaker with a global presence, with global manufacturing and supply chain and dealer networks and customers and model years and all sorts of, things that are the way they are because people are paid to manage them the way they are. Right. I think that's where you could have a time horizon that could be even longer than what you're talking about, where
could be
it's controlled deprecation of the technology and replacing it. Right. Like, because let's be honest, there's not necessarily a really good reason why the battery technology isn't better than it is now, other than we haven't made enough of it. Had we been making more of it over the last 20 years, the technology could have been there faster. There was really good battery technology, but you weren't making it at scale. And it took time to get to the point where you were making the really good batteries at scale, but they've had the quality of batteries that are going into a Tesla for quite a while, right? It's not the first time it's going into a vehicle.
I mean, mass market, I'd say 2012 onwards, right? Like that's really when the Model S hit, right? So I'd say 8 years is when we've really, and in fact, even Tesla doesn't consider itself a mass market automaker. With the Model 3s when that shift started happening, right? So
I'm just talking about the component parts.
Exactly. So it's been a short while of EV mass manufacturing. It's not a long history we have of that. Very short history.
Yeah, but it's an inevitability for a couple of reasons. One, the driving experience of an electric vehicle is far superior.
Yeah,
it's fun. right? That rush of the instant acceleration. If you put that side by side anything, you should choose that, right? Unless you, for some reason, you like something else. The cost per use, now that the battery manufacturing is at scale, the cost per use is just so much better. And then you have like the environmental benefit, right? Huge. Even though it's just the difference of upstream or downstream,
but I think it makes a
plant
difference,
production.
Like this whole environmental benefit that everyone tries to sell for electric vehicles, it doesn't work for selling. But I think where it works is once you own that asset, which is an electric, right? And once an individual is driving it, I think it makes him feel much better on an individual personal level, that he's driving this thing that's not just a great product, but man, I'm not, sort of impacting the environment. It's not a good selling point, but I think it's a good feel point for the end consumer once he has it. And I felt that because I owned an electric, right? Like I didn't get sold on its environmental benefits. I didn't. No one gets, but I owned it, and when I drive it around and when I look around to other people, I feel I'm doing something sort of morally good than other people around me. There's that. It's a very internal, small feeling, but it's good, and I think that exists for all people.
I think that's a similar feeling that we have to be able to recreate on the sharing side. Is that like, it's a little bit like the love of the new car smell, right? The electric vehicle, you get that good feeling from owning it. I think you might be able to get that on the sharing side, but I think sharing may be the way that we get mass adoption of electric vehicles, where we just start mixing it in to people, right? If you have models like Car2Go that could be utilizing electric vehicles, where the owner, there is no owner, you're borrowing the car, then you get to experience it as a service. That could be a very easy way to start getting into electric vehicles. When I was renting my electric vehicle, I was the first EV that a lot of people had driven, and so I would kind of get to be their trainer, and I had to educate them on the do's and don'ts of electric vehicles, because there aren't a lot, but there are a few things you don't want to be messing up. So what do you think we still have to do in regards to educating your generation, Gen Z, about mobility? And like, what is it going to take to make not driving cool?
That's a tough one, not making driving cool, because a lot of people think it is cool.
Yeah.
But I think again, millennials, and again, every generation after that, including my own, really craves experience or values experience over asset. And that we've seen that successfully being done by a lot of companies, including Uber, including Airbnb, a lot of these companies, they have sold experience, right? So if we can somehow make mobility an experience that enriches them, versus them just owning their own asset and sitting alone in them, which includes your shared, where this opportunity of meeting people, new people every day through a shared model. If we can sell them something on that value of interaction and connection between fellow humans, and mobility being the center ground of it, I think that's where we'll unlock that experience that people crave, and then of course the economics follow. But I think we have to chase that feeling and somehow deliver it. I don't know how, but that's just important, because so similar example is, again, uh, the computer sort of revolution, where what Apple did was just genius stuff, because they didn't try to sell the computer on spreadsheets and on doing daily mathematical, arithmetical calculations. That was not their game. Their game was, how can we help people unlock their creativity? So they really tapped very deep into the human psyche, and that connected. And we know what happened. The result was Apple being one of the biggest companies on the planet, right? So I think that's something we have to do for mobility as well. We have to just unlock some very innate human behaviors through it, and not just commoditize it, so I think that's something we have to do. I don't know whatever form that takes, but that's the ultimate goal we should be chasing, where we really make it a ground for human connection, human interaction, and just making things happen, and deliver the experience.
I think a lot of it is about finding the consumer at the right place and the right time to get them to make the decision, just like somebody would with car buying. It's why car buying ads are so constant, because you never know when you're going to catch somebody in that moment of, I've got to buy a new car. So you've got to always be there. With, you mentioned Apple, and what Apple did really well was they started with you mentioned the creative class, and they got it into colleges. And so if you were a creative or you were going to university, you learned how to use Apples, and then you kind of brought them into your career. They became a staple of the creative industry, and then everybody that wanted to look creative got a Mac, and now they've kind of transcended being a device for creative and are very much a lifestyle brand. Where like somebody's always going to argue that like the specs are not good or whatever, and I don't care. I buy every.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. What I've tried to do is look at commuters as being that identifiable class, similar to the creative class, that you can look at and you can say, all right, I've got to get this group to buy into doing it differently, buy into doing it in a way that my Mac to PC, my Mac version would be getting people to schedule it. And I think what I want to try to do is get your generation to want to have the freedom from the decision about commuting, so that you would schedule and be told the optimal time, mode, and route, based on where you're working and where you're living. Right. And make that something that you don't have to think about, just about the commute. Right. So allow you to have pure discretion in all of your personal trips. Right. When you want to go out at night, you want to go out and get some food, you go to the store, go to the gym, whatever, choose whatever mode you want. But when it comes to the commute, that's where I think we can really get people to think differently and make a different choice. If you were going to tell your peers why, what do you tell your friends to get them to think differently if they're buying a car? What is your advice to them if they're buying a car?
I actually don't advise them, because
same.
I also believe in sort of personal freedom. So I don't want to.
My buddy's literally texting me right now about wanting to buy a car, and I'm just telling him he shouldn't do it.
So I actually don't, because I understand, as much as all of this stuff is something I believe in, it's not today. It's the tomorrow that we're sort of working towards, right? So when their kids come to that, that's when I can sort of, hopefully help build a world where, their kids will really shove their parents' sort of beliefs and just go for the world that hopefully I have helped build, right? So that's what I am eyeing for. It's a long game. So I don't try to convince anyone in the present of not doing things that I would not like them to do, because that's just curbing people's personal freedom. I don't believe in that. But there are a lot of indirect ways of doing it, which is one of them is just living and breathing what I don't believe to be reality for many, right? So maybe I won't tell them, but maybe just by looking at me or just by hearing what I'm saying in a podcast or I'm putting out as a video, whatever, somewhere or the other, their brains will start taking, right? And so I believe in that as well, just doing the work, not really confronting head on. And that helps. It helps.
I think you're practicing what you're preaching here through a lot of your YouTube content, which is how we originally found you. And I'm really glad we met. How could somebody find you and follow you? Because I think you're going to continue to be doing interesting things. And if people like following young innovators, I think they should be following you on social media.
You can find me on Instagram, YouTube, or any podcasting platform that you listen on, Spotify, Apple Music, Apple Podcasts, anywhere, by the words Driven Differently. Just type Driven Differently and you'll find me. So that's simple.
Great. Well, we'll link to your Driven Differently accounts so that
Yeah.
people can click and easily find you. CJ, I
Mhm.
really appreciate you coming on and chatting. I want you to, think about coming back and keep sharing what you're learning. I'm glad we're friends on
Mhm.
WhatsApp now and we can stay in touch.
Mhm.
I think information sharing between people like us is really valuable and beneficial. And so I appreciate you coming on and talking with us today on the Commute Podcast.